Your Excellencies, esteemed colleagues and partners, ladies and gentlemen, it is my privilege to welcome you all here today to this event and discussion, Beyond Disinformation, Strengthening Our Societies Against Foreign Information Manipulation and Interference. I would like to welcome in particular our High Representative and Vice President of the European Commission, Josep Borrell, and our distinguished panelists, Minister Osmani, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of North Macedonia, and let me thank you in particular, Minister, for traveling to Brussels for this important event. We also have with us the Honourable Member of the European Parliament, Raphael Glucksmann, United Nations Under-Secretary General Melissa Fleming online, and NATO Assistant Secretary General Marie-Doa Besancenot. Mrs. Věra Jourová, Vice President of the European Commission, will join us for concluding remarks. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, a year ago, the High Representative and Vice President Josep Borrell presented the European External Action Service first report on foreign information manipulation and interference. A wide array of international experts from governments, civil society and private industry acknowledge the reality of the threat, the usefulness of the methodology represented to analyze that threat, and the need to build our defense against it. Since then, the EAS Stratcom team has worked hard to make us all together stronger and more resilient towards FIMI, as you will see in the second report we are presenting today. We worked in close cooperation with our partners from the European institutions, the EU member states, EU civil society, and many of our international partners. We are grateful to have some of them represented today in our high-level panel discussion. Before we hear our esteemed panelists, it is my pleasure to give the stage for the opening and keynote speech of today to the High Representative Vice President Josep Borrell.
Good afternoon. Bonsoir. Minister, Excellencies, members of the Parliament, ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure for me to be here with you this afternoon to welcome you to discuss one of the most significant threats of our time. It's not about a bomb that can kill you, it's about poison that can colonize your minds. And how to address it? How can we address together the foreign information manipulation and interference? FIMI. I hope FIMI will become something familiar, something that people understand what it is about as they learn to know what is COVID. 4 years ago, when I began my mandate, Russia and others had already built an extensive infrastructure for lying, manipulating and destabilizing on an industrial scale and in a sophisticated manner. Well, lies have already existed. In Spain, in Spanish we say bulo. A bulo is a rumor. You spread a rumor. In the Middle Ages, the Jewish people were the victims of rumors, no? Oh, the Jews kill young children and then they drink the blood, or they put poison in the sources to kill people. It has always existed. But now we are much more vulnerable to this threat because information circulates at the speed of light. And manipulation and interference has become an industrial activity. We have been working a lot in order to make our people wiser, to have information, to know. Coming from illiteracy, not being able to read, to have enough information in order to be able to discern, to be able to choose. And at a certain moment of time, in order to participate in the elections, you had to prove that you were able to read. Now everybody has the right to participate in the elections. But the problem is not to be able to read and to know. The problem is to be misinformed, to be facing systematically an information which is false and can completely trump your understanding of reality. And then come the pandemic, the COVID-19, and we saw how malign actors start to undermine trust in science and literally put our lives at risk. And not always ordinary people. You can remember someone who was not exactly an ordinary people, giving absurd advices about how to fight against the illness. And remember that people were saying, drink that, do that, putting lives of people at risk. And then came the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And with that, we have been facing a fully fledged instrumental of war. A war that targets not only us, but our partners in the Western Balkans. That's why we invited my friend, the minister from North Macedonia, who can explain you case studies of how this information works. And that's why also we have here one distinguished member of the European Parliament who has written an extraordinary book, who has been a bestseller about some misinformation, disinformation, and foreign and manipulation. FIMI actors actively seek to undermine democracy, proposing an alternative model, making people mistrust about everything, mistrust institutions, and toxically infiltrating our societies to poison them. So we had to respond. And I think that our response has been important, decisive, advancing our capacities from the strategic compass. When I presented the strategic compass and made the list of the threats, this information was there. And imposing restrictive measures, sanctions, colloquially we say sanctions, against disinformation actors and banning disinformation channels in Europe. Now we are facing a new wave of information manipulation. During the war between Israel and Hamas, then let me share a real-life example, someone that happened. On the 31st of October, people in Paris, Parisians, woke up to the sight of 250 blue stars of David spray-painted on buildings across the city. Not one, not two, 250, strategically located around the city of Paris, marking the homes where Jewish people were living. This reminds us the worst days of the Holocaust and some of the darkest times in European history, and this spread quickly in the social media. Well, in another genocide that happened in Africa, also the houses of the people that were going to be killed were marked the previous day in order to guide the killers. But imagine the shock in Paris when people saw in 250 places the Star of David. Some commentators immediately start blaming the Muslim community. Oh, this is the Muslims, they are pushing hate against Jews. And it immediately ignited a discussion on France, breaking the social fabric, attacking political Islam, and attacking multiculturalism. And these images reach many parts of the world, much beyond France. However, a week later, the French authorities traced the incident, looked about it, and they found a Russian destabilization campaign behind it. It's a textbook example of foreign information manipulation and interference. Because the Russian perpetrators, and I can say the Russians, knowing what I'm saying, because it has been proved and verified, identified a potential fault line in European society. Well, the start of David marking the places where people are living. And they pinpointed a subject that could generate divisive positions and then immediately use about 1,000 bots to spread more than 2,500 posts on social media. As I said, many sources traveling at the speed of light. The constant stream of lies is meant to play the notion that all information is unreliable and not trustworthy, to disseminate the feeling that nothing is true and everything is false, to make us suspicious about everything, that there is not such a thing as truth, and there is nothing that can be trusted. This is a very uncomfortable society where you cannot trust anyone to anything. And that's why it is a danger, because this information weakens the social fabric, poisons democracies, because only the information makes democracy possible. Democracy is a system that works on the basis of information, good information. That's why dictatorship, the first thing they do is to close the newspapers, install censure, and block information, only the one that they consider good for them. Liberal democracies cannot live without information, without reliable information, and without trust in democratic processes, such as elections. And if we want to defend democracy, if we want to defend ourselves from manipulation, we have to protect ourselves considering that as a security threat, and to go to this battle with the same capacity that the ones who are attacking us. And that's why when we presented the strategic compass, with a plan to strengthen the European Union's security and defence policy, we made the decisive actions against information manipulation as one of its pillars. We have to defend ourselves from the threats who are challenging us, and one of these threats is manipulation of the information. You go to the market and you buy a piece of meat, you will have a certificate saying this is good, you can eat it, it's not going to kill you. But when you receive information and your brain will process it, what is the level of quality saying you this is truth, you can believe it. You're not going to be in a very bad shape because you eat bad information. There is nowhere. So after the strategic compass, we created this information sharing and analysis center to help civil society in our member states and beyond to pool their knowledge about root causes, about incidents, about threats, and we are committed to the creation of a toolbox for high foreign information manipulation and interference, FIMI. 2 years after the adoption of the compass, well, in the meantime, the war in Ukraine came, I can say that we have delivered, and I would like to explain you what we have delivered. The FIMI toolbox makes use of instruments such as restrictive measures against aggressors, which we used to ban the so-called media of the Kremlin, like Russia Today and Sputnik, who has been banned here in Europe, not, for example, in other places like in the Sahel. The toolbox also provides for capacity building and work with civil society organizations to increase media literacy, not only to be able to read, but to understand which is the sources and which are the dangers behind some of the information you are consuming. And this comes at the right moment, as the Global Risk Report by the World Economic Forum has just ranked disinformation as the second biggest risk the world is going to face this year. That's just difficult to believe, huh? But the World Economic Forum considers that disinformation is the second biggest risk that we are going to face this year. And additionally to that, artificial intelligence comes and has been making a real revolution on how you can manipulate contents. It's much cheaper today to produce and much difficult to detect an information which is completely false, making the asymmetric threats to our democracies still more dangerous. And why this year? Because 2024 is a critical year to fight against FIMI, because we have a lot of elections. 60 elections will be held around the world. 2 billion people, 50% of the adult population of the world, will be asked to cast a vote. Half of the adult population of the world will be called to vote. In the European Parliament, in the US, in India, in many places around the world, elections will become the prime target for malign foreign actors, as we have seen last year in the Spanish elections. On the last year's Spanish elections, Russian agents, once again, imitated the official website of the regional government of Madrid 2 days before the elections, warning people about ETA, the former terrorist organization that, thanks God, no longer exists, but before vanishing, killed more than 1,000 people in Spain. Well, that ETA was coming back and was having a plan to attack the polling stations. So time and careful planning are of the essence to counter such foreign information manipulation and interference attack. And how do we have to proceed? Well, we have to focus on 4 venues: containing incidents to avoid them from spreading further, to detect and stop them as quick as possible, minimizing their effects, redirecting audiences to verify information, make people that are sensible to one information to understand that they can check this information somewhere else. And maybe the most important one is strategically ignoring them to avoid escalating an incident, attracting unwanted attention to this incident themselves. So maybe sometimes the better strategy is not to give a lot of importance, but encapsulate it and avoid that people know about the existence of it, not falling on it, not looking for it because they were aware that something was happening about something. And all that allows us, and the people, thank you for your work at the External Action Service, to target measures that can help us to prepare and protect societies against potential interference in the elections. Exposing false stories beyond the strike, restricting the amplification of manipulated content, removing websites or channels associated with FIMI, giving visibility to reliable content, identifying and limit financial incentive to FIMI activities, or taking legal measures, including sanctions. We built a legal framework to sanction people who disseminate false information. We have a threat report, a rapid response plan, and the first step is always situational awareness of what is happening. Now we have published our second annual FIMI report that sheds light on the current threats landscape based on 750 investigated FIMI incidents and presenting countermeasures. In the incidents analyzed, we see that different individuals are being targeted. And one of the most targeted individuals are President Zelensky. Another one is President Emmanuel Macron. but also movie actors to amplify their reach. And the report also finds that Ukraine continues to be the country most often targeted by information manipulation, not by accident. It's not by accident that Ukraine is the country more targeted, because who is behind this information? Someone who's making war against Ukraine by the classical means of warfare. Ukrainians are the most battle-hardened. Ukrainian civil society plays a major role on suffering disinformation and fighting against it, and we support them. We are doing a crucial work through the foreign policy instrument. My services and the services of the Commission contributed to maintaining good information, which is a good basis to maintain security. For example, information that Ukraine tried to create a chemical incident in occupied Donetsk was immediately detected by social media users. And they found that this image were created long before the incident happened. But Russia immediately put this incident in order to make people believe that, yes, Ukrainians in the Donetsk were creating a kind of chemical arms. Well, it's not the first time that we are being told that someone is having arms of mass destruction. So it means that the idea of sending lies to the public opinion worldwide has not been waiting until the social networks were covering the planet. Well, rapid action is essential to prevent manipulation information from spreading, and it has to be debunked before it goes viral. Then we have to share information. But what does it mean in concrete terms? Let's go back to the example of the Start of David example. This operation was uncovered by the French government agency, Viginum. Viginum in French, I suppose, is vigile numérique, no? Surveille le monde digital, Viginum, which is a digital watchdog that was created by the French government only 2 years ago. Viginum shared its information with our rapid alert system here in Brussels. We initiated this platform at the very beginning of my mandate. It will be part of my heritage. It is managed by the External Action Service and brings together the Member States, the Commission, the Council and the European Parliament. The system is being used by members to alert of ongoing information manipulation activities. And this thanks to this communication between the French watchdog and our rapid alert system that we could discover which were at the origin of this Stars of David across Paris. And it is particularly important because Russia and others are testing tactics in some countries before rolling them in others. This was not by accident. It happened immediately after the start of war in Gaza, in France, a country with a strong Jewish community, but also with a strong share of Muslim population. Let's test it, and if it works, we'll use it in somewhere else. It means that we need to build a strong international cooperation in order to fight FIMI on global scale. We cooperate with the G7 partners through a mechanism coordinated by our Canadian colleagues and with NATO. We are also discussing with the US in a different format, including through the work of the US-EU Trade and Technology Council. We need to agree on a concrete methodology in order to create standards that can be used to face a threat between us, EU, and US. Let me say something about resilience building. We need to support the citizens, the institutions, the civil society, and crucially, journalists, to be better equipped to tackle FIMI. I hope that all of you know and use our website, EU versus Disinformation. It started working in 2015. Since then, the team of EU versus Disinformation has collected about 16,000 cases of information manipulation. They have reached more than 20 million people just last year, and now including audiences in Africa and other parts of the world. Every year we are providing hundreds of workshops for journalists, for fact-checkers, for Ministers of Foreign Affairs, and for the members of the European Union. Because what we are doing is fighting against an industry that produces lies, as Ford started producing cars in a chain production, 24 hours a day, non-stop. And we are doing that everywhere outside the European Union, like in North Macedonia, and in an instant, in a moment, Minister, you will debrief us in some of the cases you have been living. We are training independent journalists globally. Needless to say how important the journalists are as a pillar of democracies, and they are too often targeted by FIMI. We are offering training on legal aid to combat lawsuits aimed at pressuring journalists into self-censoring. Why to create a censor department if you can influence journalists to become, each one of them, a censor on itself? And, of course, we provide training on how to recognize and respond to information manipulation. Another word about sanctions. Sanctions has become a very popular word. Everybody talks about the European Union imposing sanctions. In fact, the word sanctions doesn't exist in our treaty. You go to the treaties, you do a search, sanctions doesn't exist. What you will find is restrictive measures. You take a measure to restrict something. And we take measures to restrict the activities of the FIMI actors. I mentioned the activities of Russia Today and Sputnik. Last July, we listed 7 Russian individuals and 5 entities responsible for conducting a digital information manipulation campaign called Recent Reliable News. They have the sense of humor. Recent Reliable News was a factory of lies. Recent Reliable News was instrumental in spreading the image of the Star of David to a large number of accounts affiliated with them on Facebook and the platform today called X. On FIMI, threat reports find that across 750 investigated incidents covered 4,000 channels and were activated almost 10,000 times. Then we have to work with the Digital Service Act that sets legal obligation for online platforms to prevent abuses. And we have made use of these powers in the wake of the attacks on Israel 7th of October, when social media channels were flooded with malicious content, things that were false. And we have to identify it and warn people. But all of that would be useless, but not efficient, without a public debate. We must ensure effective safeguards without slipping into censorship. And this is a very delicate balance. We cannot invent the Ministry of Truth, the Ministry of Trust, the minister, the one who says, this is trust, this is not trust. You can imagine, no? Which will be the world in which someone could have the stamp to say, okay, this is true, this is not true. And authoritarian regimes have enacted disinformation law, but they disguise, in fact, as a protection of public order or national security, but in practice they are being used to suppress dissidents and suppress freedom of expression, which is the border between controlling the quality of information and going into censorship. which is a balance between security and freedom. This is crucial. The balance between security and freedom appears in every dimension of the public life, now also in information. And the European Parliament has already debated this issue, contributing with useful recommendations. I would like to thank the INGE Committee and its chair, the member of the Parliament, Glucksmann, who is here, for their important work and for your very important book. But we have to engage all institutions in this democratic process, because at the end, democratic institutions are the primary target of information manipulation and interference. More than ever, we must amplify the truth, counteracting the industry of life. And when we enact decisions or rules here in Brussels, they reverberate around the world, and they can sometimes be received negatively. We have to take care with that. For example, the deforestation regulation or the carbon border adjustment mechanism, CBAM, which some saw as protectionist measures, which they are not. But you have to explain why they are not, because it's quite easy to present them as if they were. It's quite easy to present it saying, look, this is at the end, it's just Western protectionism. They want to keep us out of the competition because we have a certain economic advantage. If we don't explain what we are doing, we leave the door open for others to fill the space. And it makes more important than ever the pedagogical activity in the political life. You have to explain what you do, what is your purpose, and how do you want to get it. Otherwise, someone will manipulate it and present it with a negative bias against you. So the work is not only to create a good tool, but to make the service l'après-vente. Il faut le présenter, il faut l'expliquer. Il faut dépenser plus d'argent et du temps, beaucoup plus d'énergie dans la pédagogie qui accompagne à l'action politique. For example, in Beirut, we have a strategic communication hub for the Middle East. This hub communicates in Arabic because we believe that everybody around the world speaks English or French. Well, in fact, they speak Spanish, but we believe that they speak English or French, as we do, no? More or less. And then we don't take care of people, millions of people who speak Arabic or Chinese. And if you want to get to them, you have to talk in their language. The other day in the Cairo airport was full of advertising of Russia Today broadcasting in Arabic. Russia Today has arrived to the Arabic world and it's announcing themselves as the good source of information in Arabic. So we have to do the same thing, to speak and to use the same language. So we communicate in Arabic, including through social media with the European Union in Arabic. And this is more needed than ever. Sorry to say, but we need people who speak not only English, but Arabic and Hindi and Chinese, and language spoken by hundreds of millions of people, which are not part of our traditional parameters linguistical culture. And this year we have also set a task force to combat disinformation in sub-Saharan Africa, because we have seen images of people in sub-Saharan Africa being clearly pushed by the Russian propaganda against the Western countries. So we are engaging in a battle of narrative, something I was starting to talk just at the beginning of my mandate, when we start discussing about masks and about vaccines, about virus, and about political systems. We are going to live in a battle of narrative, and this battle has to be won, and in order to be won, it has to be fought. And in order to be fought, you have to have capacities, tools, and dedicated people. And once again, thank you very much to the ones who are doing this work, a silent work that little by little is emerging, being known by the media, by the public opinion, and will be an important actor of our future political life. To conclude, this is a matter of security. I am in charge of foreign policy and security policy, and security is no longer just a matter of weaponry, it's not a matter of armies, it's a matter of information, it's a matter of the social fabric and how the citizens get fed with the ideas, the facts that later will determine their capacity as citizens to choose their government and to mark the policy of their nations and the policy of the European Union and influencing on the history of the world. Keep in mind, unchecked, malicious contents spreads like a cancer and puts the health of a democracy at risk. But we have the tools to effectively fight against this disease. We have the capacity, we need more, but we have been starting fighting this battle, and this meeting and this discussion today is part of this process. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you very much, High Representative, for your enlightening speech. You have mentioned the very different ways in which FIMI can affect our societies. You have given striking example on how FIMI actors operate. You have also shown the avenues on which we engage in order to fight against it. You have also mentioned the importance of international cooperation. The following panel will therefore discuss the FIMI threats to democracy and the international rules-based order. We have asked Terry Schulz, renowned journalist in international affairs, currently freelance reporter for NPR and Deutsche Welle in Belgium, to moderate this panel. I will leave you the floor, Terry, and I will also ask the other panelists to join the floor. Thank you.
Thank you so much to my panel and to all of you joining us here in the room and those of us also watching us on live streaming. So we've just heard the High Representative say that he would like the public to become as aware of FIMI as it is of COVID. And I think that there are many ways that this is an apt comparison, and not just in terms of familiarity. We know that FIMI is dangerous to societies, that it creates fear and mistrust and instability, that it spreads terrifyingly fast and is so incredibly hard to stop. But at the same time, just like with the disease, there are people working overtime to try to stop it, and even to try to, in ways, vaccinate people against being vulnerable to believing lies and mistruths. So with that, we're going to talk to some of them now. And by chance, Foreign Minister Osmani is also a medical doctor, to continue the comparison a little bit further. So Foreign Minister, good to see you again. Thank you so much for coming to Brussels for this. When you were chairing the OSCE, you certainly came under a lot of pressure. A lot of disinformation was spread about North Macedonia, perhaps about you yourself. So tell us how you managed that, and also how North Macedonia, as a candidate country for the EU and a member of NATO, is working with its international partners to work on this very big problem for your country. Thank you.
Well, good evening. Thank you for having me. Let me begin by thanking High Representative Borrell for convening this important meeting, and also for inviting me and making me part of this distinguished group of panelists. I stand before you as you introduced me as Foreign Minister of North Macedonia, but since I see that I'm sole representative of the Western Balkans, beside that FIMI or disinformation knows no borders, still distinctive regions and countries have distinctive features when it comes to how, their vulnerability to disinformation. And I think Western Balkans is particularly vulnerable. In general, it is a soft underbelly of the European Union, given that it's a political non-EU island within the EU, and due to the uncompleted EU integration process, partially completed NATO integration process, coupled with open remaining files such as separatist dynamics of Republika Srpska in Bosnia, lack of mutual recognition between Kosovo and Serbia, rising nationalistic rhetoric in North Macedonia, threatening the achievements of the last years, makes it a fertile ground for what it was assessed 20 years ago, that the fire line or the front line between West and East, I mean Russia here, crosses through Western Balkans. And I think we have been underestimating this statement of 20 years ago, mainly because of NATO expansion to the east, thinking that the line is further in the east. But Russian aggression against Ukraine, I think, raised the awareness about the vulnerability of Western Balkans. And I noticed that just a few days ago, President Biden said, if Russia is to win in Ukraine, what will happen with Western Balkans? And I think this was raising the alarm about the importance of Western Balkans in this regard. And I believe so that the ultimate battle will be, even the battle of narratives and disinformations will happen in the Western Balkans. It has been throughout in the last 30 years, since the dissolution of Yugoslavia, mainly attacking religious, ethnic and political harmony, and by that preventing reconciliation, which is the most important step in sustainable peace and EU integration of the region, but particularly was highlighted during the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine. We particularly instantly noticed in North Macedonia, since North Macedonia unequivocally supported Ukraine politically, diplomatically, militarily. I mean, diplomatically, as chair in office, you mentioned my position last year. We turned OSCE into a platform for political and legal accountability of Russia in Ukraine. Militarily, we are considered the 4th or 5th country in NATO per capita for providing military support. We adopted and implemented all EU sanctions against Ukraine, so 100% aligned our EU with EU foreign and security policy, which is good because it showed that we are a credible candidate for membership in the European Union, but somehow this fast-tracked our place on the list of unfriendly countries of Russia, and in a way made us a legitimate target for their arsenal of asymmetric and hybrid warfare. And we instantly noticed that in North Macedonia, mainly in the online space, by using disinformation to reduce trust in institutions, in mainstream media, in fostering hatred among nations and people, which in multi-ethnic societies is very sensitive. Then in inciting conflicts, unrest, even, why not, violently overthrowing democratic institutions. And first, it began by portraying negative image of Ukraine, representing the Russia's narrative as Ukraine being I don't know, war profiteers or Nazi groups, and then portraying that EU or the West has provoked the war by expanding NATO. Then trying to blame the governments in the Western Balkans for being responsible for the inflation, for high costs of food and oil due to having non-neutral position toward Ukraine. And all this propaganda was multiplied through many channels in North Macedonia. But this was only continuation of what we have seen throughout critical junctures of North Macedonia in its EU process. Like in 2018, when we organized the referendum on the name change, there was an infamous boycott movement that managed to convince many citizens of North Macedonia not to go to the ballots. And the referendum, in a way, failed in terms of reaching the necessary threshold of turnout. What we realized later is that this boycott movement was not organic, was not entirely organic, or was not outcome of the internal political processes, but rather it was fully computational by political bots, by online trolling, by using hate speech. So it was masterminded somewhere outside of North Macedonia and managed to threaten the most important step of North Macedonia before joining NATO. The same thing happened during the so-called French proposal with regard to the start of accession negotiations with the European Union. People went to the street based on a draft that was not even similar to the one that was agreed between us and Bulgaria, because a false draft was leaked beforehand and people based on that draft went to the street. And when this turmoil started, then it was very difficult to go behind it. So therefore, it is very important that we are proactive in fighting disinformation. North Macedonia is the first country in the region to adopt a comprehensive plan, action plan to fight disinformation. It was jointly prepared with NATO, with EU. Our membership into NATO showed that NATO is actually an efficient platform of communication. We are grateful to the department responsible for that, but EU as well, EAS, with its task force that helped us in designing that platform, which is based on several pillars. One is active transparency. I think the word active here is important. Governments need to force transparency by providing facts, by providing news, by providing links to news, by publishing it, by making it available to people. Then modern communication, mainstream and digital. We need to be proactive about promoting our values, diversity, solidarity, the values that we as a system of values do represent. So we should not be against, because we are not bots. This is what bots expect from us, that we are defensive, we are against. Actually, we should be for and we should be proactive. Then it's media literacy. We changed the curricula in first grade and fourth grade elementary school to introduce fact-checking resources of media. Then collaboration and networking in order to provide a whole society approach, including civil society, including state stakeholders and all others, but also collaboration and networking with NATO, with EU and other stakeholders worldwide in order to build resilience. And fifth, which is rapid reaction to debunking the fake news. This is so important, because this time that goes from a fake news being delivered until it's debunked, it's critical for the formation of the public opinion around it. I think this is for introduction, and then we can debate further. Thank you so much.
Really interesting. Sounds like a model. You've moved really quickly. I'm going to go next to Raphael Glucksmann. You chaired the European Parliament's Special Committee on Foreign Interference, and over the course of the last several years, the life of the committee, you had dozens of hearings, hundreds of experts. So share with us here what you learned. Are politicians getting it, both MEPs and those who will be running in the next elections, that this is really incumbent on them to help stop the spread of misinformation about themselves, about other issues? And what about voters? What did you learn that voters can use to, again, not believe the lies, to turn away from them?
Well, I promised Lutz, who is here, that I will be diplomatic. So I will say, not not really, and not really. And why? You know, I have an obsessional mind. So I have a favorite writer called Romain Gary, and he was a French resistant. He followed de Gaulle in London, and he asked himself in London, all these years of fighting, he asked himself one question: why did not the French elite follow de Gaulle in London? And he said, well, was it because they were fanatically pro-Nazi? No. Fanatically anti-Semitic? A bit, but not too much. So why? And he said, the reason is very sad. They loved their furniture too much, and their comfort. And the truth is that as much as I feel that here, and especially in the EAS, and with the high rep, and with Lutz, and with the team, there is this feeling of urgency and the consciousness of being in the middle of a hybrid warfare. I'm not sure I have the same feeling when I'm traveling to all Western European member states. And I'm being diplomatic as I have promised. So let me be a bit blunt. We are in the middle of a hybrid warfare in a year, 2024, and the High Representative mentioned it, which will be decisive. You have European elections, and then, few months after, on 5th of November, you will have the American election. And it's a turning point. Can you imagine the gain for Moscow in this situation if you have a wave of far-right anti-European forces in June, and then Donald Trump in the White House in November? It changed totally the equation. And the victory that he cannot achieve, Putin, in Ukraine on the battlefield, he can get it through manipulation of elections. So elections are a moment of greatness of our democracies, but it's also for us a moment of weakness. We have to face it, and we have to understand that the people we are facing, they don't promote their agenda. What they do is spread chaos. And you mentioned the Star of David in France. They will seize every single crisis and jump on it and put salt on the wounds. And what I have learned during all these years studying their strategy is that basically they are using our weakness to create an atmosphere of civil war. How can you explain rationally that, for instance, in Spain, they will support at the same time the two most opposite sides you can imagine, like the ultra-radical side of Catalonian independentists and the ultra-nationalist side of Vox. At the same time, why? Because they want to create chaos and show that democracy is not functioning. They want to create an atmosphere of civil war. That's why they put this Star of David on the walls of Paris. And the same will go on with all the difficult topic of these elections. You will have insurrections all over Europe against the Green Deal, for instance. You will have farmers' movements. You will have movements in Netherlands, in Germany against the heating system changes and everything. And every time they will use this, they will not create this, but they will use it, create hashtags, and multiply, and echo, and destabilize. And this is, or take the migration subject. You don't think they will use the migration subject looking at how polarized already the European public opinion is about this. And they use people as tools. So they will precipitate crisis. And I'm not sure we have prepared enough our public opinion on this issue. And I'm thinking that sometimes we are like somnambules. You know, we hope that we won't fall, but at the same time, we keep working towards the abyss. So it's true that here you have a consciousness, but at the end of the day, the elections will take place in nation states. And in these institutions, I'm not convinced that we are understanding what you said, that there is this battle of narrative. Because we can take measures, we can take sanctions or restrictive measures, but at the end of the day, the decisive thing is the battle of narrative, not only outside, but in our own countries, in our own democracies. And my only message, I mean, we have written hundreds of pages and asked for so many measures, and some of them are already enforced by your team. But at the end of the day, it's a mental revolution that we need. It's something different. It's that we have been for so long Democrats by legacy or comfort or habitude. And we need to turn into passionate democrats. We need to understand that nothing will be stable anymore and that everything will always be moving. We cannot cancel this situation. We cannot erase it. The only thing that we can do is to learn how to preserve our fundamental freedoms and our institutions in the middle of this very moving land.
Okay, thank you. Did that pass, Lutz? Is that diplomatic? It was diplomatic. Raphael, thank you. Okay, thank you for opening the opening statement. Melissa Fleming, thank you so much for making time to join us from New York. Melissa is the Undersecretary General for UN Global Communications. Big job. And Melissa, I'm going to read from my notes because I can't remember the name of this. The UN's preparing to release a code of conduct for information integrity on digital platforms, and here's the goal. It seeks to provide a concerted global response to information threats that is firmly rooted in human rights, including the rights to freedom of expression and opinion and access to information. And yes, that's really all one sentence. So Melissa, given that the work on this is underway right now, can you give us some idea of what that framework will look like, especially considering that you have basically all the countries in the world to try to come to some kind of common agreement on what is this threat? What can you do about it? And yeah, as I said, big job. Thank you so much, Melissa, for joining us, and we look forward to hearing this.
Well, thanks, Terry, and hello to everybody, and actually greetings from Miami, where I am actually attending a conference on disinformation. So there are academics and researchers and journalists from all over the U.S. gathered here. So I think if there's one thing to be optimistic about is that there is this whole ecosystem of really intelligent people, many ex-platform workers who are really working on this issue and trying to join forces and collaborate. I know that we have many people like that as well in Europe, including those who are at this and attending this conference. And I think, from a UN perspective, if I may, before I go into the code of conduct, just very briefly to just say that what you are describing, this panel and Mr. Borrell, is something that we're seeing all over the world, and the UN really is considering mis and disinformation and hate speech as not just a serious threat, but, and I'll use Mr. Borrell's words, a poison that is infecting our information ecosystems everywhere, and also people's minds. And as a result, and we have concluded also in our work studying the phenomenon, not just being subject to it, is that it is threatening human progress. And you know that the UN is all about working towards human progress. And we're finding that we're up against a very difficult operating environment, not just deliberately being used to undermine democracy, but obviously the UN works in many conflict zones and very many fragile countries coming out of war where we have big peacekeeping missions, and we're seeing deliberate disinformation being used to create not just more fog of war, but more suspicion and more hate. And one of the things that we are, figuring out, we were hearing it anecdotally from around the world, but now we're surveying our peacekeepers, our staff, and we're finding that the vast majority of them are saying that the disinformation is deliberately being used to attack the UN, our missions, our operations, and our issues, our priorities, obviously. And this is making their work much more dangerous. I can say I've been working in communications for international organizations for my whole career, and I have never worked in such a troubled information environment. So it's much more difficult for voices of facts and science, and also for journalists to get our voices heard, voices for positive change. So, obviously, I think we also feel the urgency. Just to note, we just did in the context of the code of conduct and the deliberations that we're doing and the research we're doing, one of the things that was clear is that most of the world's research has been done in the richer parts of the world, in the US and in Europe, very little in many of the countries that we work in. So we decided to survey our staff, many of whom are national staff, and 80% of our staff said mis and disinformation could erode trust in the UN and endanger staff and the communities that we're trying to protect. And again, a recent peacekeeping survey, 75% of peacekeepers said mis and disinformation was making their jobs more dangerous. So, we've heard a lot about the rise also in general of hate speech, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, racism. This is also making things worse, and we're very, very concerned about the rapid rollout of AI technology in the disinformation space. Disinformation actors have an even more accessible, cheap set of tools to create targeted disinformation at scale with much lower costs. So we can't go on like this. The Secretary General has been saying this for a long time. We're working both in the space of information integrity and also on AI. And I won't go into that now, although they're, in terms of information harm, interrelated. And then to your question, yes, we are leading a process to develop a UN code of conduct for information integrity. And I have to say, thanks to the EU, we've been consulting very closely, because the EU Digital Services Act is very helpful to us. It's setting a standard of principles that are going to be useful. The difference is our code is going to be voluntary, and it's also going to be reflective of the global situation all over the world. But many of what we're finding right now, it's not a member state negotiated document. It is, unlike many of the other initiatives that are being worked toward the Summit of the Future at the UN, it is a voluntary code. The consultations are not just with the platforms, not just with member states, but with civil society, with youth, and representative of the world. And we hope when it comes out that it will act as a gold standard to guide member states, also digital platforms, civil society, and other stakeholders. It has already, we've kind of flagged some of the recommendations and the principles that we see coming. That it will definitely encourage safety, privacy, transparency by design in all products, new and old, for users in all countries, and not just the most profitable or high-profile markets. Also, we're going to be looking at the whole ecosystem of advertisers and the PR industry, and pressing them through this code of conduct to shoulder their responsibility, and not to be this enabling system of monetization of content that results in harm. So, I mean, also your question, again, if it's voluntary, I think you were trying to get at how is it going to work? The UN does, it's interesting in our consultations around the world, we've been hearing, oh, I'm so glad that the UN is putting this together. It will be something we can point to for advocacy if they're civil society. Yesterday, I had somebody who left Facebook recently and said, I wish that we had the UN Code of Conduct when I was at Facebook, because there are all kinds of employees there who would love to point to international standards and try to get their companies to live up to them. So I think it will allow our country teams also to have something to push towards, because the UN now is going to take on information integrity at country level as we go forward as a development issue. Thanks so much, and I look forward to hearing more.
Thank you, Melissa. And it's pretty daunting after your career, including at the IAEA and other organizations, that you've never seen it worse despite all this work. So I think that's pretty sobering. And with that, I'll turn to Marie Doha Besançonu, who has quite a full plate when it comes to disinformation there at NATO. We know that Russia is spending well over €1 billion per year funding its disinformation and propaganda campaigns against, EU against everyone, but against NATO as one of its prime targets. So how do you even put a dent in it when you know there's that kind of money, that kind of resources, it's at a state media level? It's difficult. Marie Doha.
Thank you. No pressure. And Russia is not the only, of course, state actor that we do monitor and whose activities in that field we've been observing. And maybe the one thing I think we should take out of our mind right away is the idea that we will fight Russia with the same tools and with the same kinds of investments. We won't, because being passionate Democrats, as Raphael aptly described us all, we don't believe in using the same tools. We believe we were best uphold the values that we defend by behaving accordingly. So of course it's a deliberate choice on our side not to work in the same way. Now we may not have the same investment strategy, so we don't pay for proxies, we don't pay to convince. However, we do have partners, we have friends, we have like-minded partners, and I think this is one of the main keys to countering FIMI. So of course, the challenges are enormous. Among them, there's of course the scale of disinformation, and it's been mentioned by the High Representative. Of course, we cannot counter every piece of disinformation that comes our way. I think he called it strategically ignoring some of that. Yes, absolutely. But we are getting better and better at understanding and monitoring this disinformation. We're better able to identify disinformation peaks, which are just remaining in a very conspiracy kind of environment, and others who are actually spreading and impacting our different parts of our societies. And this makes us better equipped to actually decide when to reply, when not, and how to shape the messaging of our political leaders. And this is what we're doing at NATO. So maybe on NATO's stance on that specifically, first of all, there is, and I'd like to reassure Raphael also on this, there is a very acute awareness that this is a major threat. And indeed, and Minister, you have mentioned the mechanisms and the coordination and how much we liaise with the allies on that topic. Yes, there's a very high level of awareness, and I think I like to quote the latest agreed document by the allies, which was last summer in Vilnius, at the Vilnius summit. And I think this is the first approach that makes NATO's approach very special on disinformation and hybrid threats more generally. Our approach is a collective defense approach. So the allies have agreed, and the declaration states that hybrid operations against allies could reach the level of an armed attack and could lead the Council to invoke Article 5 of the Washington Treaty. So this is the first specificity that NATO's approach to hybrid threats reflects the fact that we are a military and political alliance, and as such, we do coordinate on the military chain of command and the civilian side to assess the risks and define the response options accordingly. The second approach, which makes NATO's approach special, is that there is a high level of understanding that disinformation is not just Stratcom or a comms issue, it is a national security issue. And it is on that basis that we're discussing this with our individual allies. However, I should maybe specify that attribution, the attributing a campaign in your territory remains a sovereign decision of allies. So NATO supports that, can amplify that, but it's a decision made by allies. The third element that qualifies NATO's approach is maybe the resilience approach. It is considered a resilience issue, both national and collective, and that's rooted in a different article, Article 3 of the Washington Treaty, which requires allies to develop their own defensive capabilities on their own or collectively with the other allies. And this we've been also supporting and accelerating because NATO sees as its priority to mitigate strategic vulnerabilities of our societies collectively. And maybe the last element is that we consider manipulation of information a societal issue as well as a values issue, because we are a values-based alliance and democracy does lie at the heart of what we do. And indeed, this whole of society approach is very much part of NATO's DNA. We've always been working with civil society groups. And what we're doing right now is learning to leverage them even more, to help them, support them as they also support our own defense of values, democracies, rules-based international order, and so on. So.
Thank you very much for that, and I think also you have good examples that are both in the EU and NATO in the Nordic countries, and the minister reminded me that what you're doing now in schools has been done in the Nordic countries forever, teaching kids. You're Nordic too now. Yeah, it's not a bad place to be, right? But they've been doing that with kids, and this is when I mentioned vaccinating kids. This is what they look at. That they find that children who have been taught fact-checking at young ages simply don't believe this when it comes across. Sputnik tried to open an office in Finland, and it shut down for having lack of audience, and that's a huge compliment to the skepticism of those kids. So I think that, when you hear that you're doing that in North Macedonia, I think that's really the place to start. I want to open to the audience, and I have a little bit trouble seeing with the light here, but before we have one question back there, but first I'd like to offer my panelists a chance to address anything that was said amongst you. Do you have any questions or any follow-ups on that, Mr. Minister? I think that, you said that you were getting a lot of help. I just have a question. You were getting a lot of help from NATO and from the EU. So what kind of programs is that? Because I think that NATO has had some involvement actively with North Macedonia that Marie Doha was telling me about.
Well, I mentioned that North Macedonia has been heavily exposed to disinformation campaign that threatened to derail even the strategic course of the country. So then we realized that we have to engage, ask for support, involve whole society and design action plans in order to mitigate the consequences or deal with the challenges of disinformation. You mentioned I'm a medical doctor. We tend to do diagnosis. In North Macedonia, there is one diagnosis. Is Russia behind every attempt to undermine North Macedonia's strategic course, North Macedonia's good neighborliness, North Macedonia's internal cohesion? And this has been proved throughout these critical junctures that we have gone through. And this is why we insisted, why NATO membership has been most important for strategic goal of North Macedonia since its membership, since we wanted to move into the security umbrella that NATO provides, including the resilience toward FIMI and disinformation in general. So we have been in regular communication, in this rapid reaction mode that we have established, in building capacities, in building resilience, in introducing action plan and in the implementation of it. I'm not saying that North Macedonia is perfect case, is actually subject to a huge disinformation campaign, mainly stemming from Russia, that were exacerbated last year during our OSCE chairpersonship. I visited myself as OSCE chairman in office Transnistria, and after I returned from Chisinau, I went to Tiraspol. Few days after, Zakharova had a press conference saying that a person...
That's the Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman.
Yeah, Russian Foreign Ministry, yeah. She announced that a person from Chisinau was apprehended in Tiraspol since they had been planning to blow out the convoy where I've been traveling to go to Tiraspol to meet the authorities. If we didn't have the experience with that kind of disinformation, we might have engaged into trying to bring this out more and expand this story, but rather we managed to isolate and to continue with the business as usual and keep Ukraine as most important priority throughout our chairpersonship. So this is the experience that taught us that we need collaboration, we need networking, we need NATO, we need EAS in order countries, particularly from the region, to build capacities to face disinformation.
Well, and they need you to be strong because NATO is tied, you're all tied together, and if you are subject to disinformation, if you're a weak link, it's hard for all the allies, isn't it, Marie Doha?
Yes, absolutely, and to be very concrete, we have set up a task force on disinformation a couple of months ago, and indeed we do rely on best national practices, and I really have to thank you for the wonderful colleagues from North Macedonia who are active contributors. They are active because they have a story to tell. They have very concrete examples that all other allies learn from, and we collect all that data. It helps us understand patterns. It helps us fight back. So yes, we're very grateful for this, and this is what we're doing with allies, and also with organizations like the EIS, and I also like to extend the thanks to the EIS, who has really provided us with also tools, mechanisms, lessons learned, definitions, to bring this in a political organization, you know, where the discussion is no longer disinformation is just a piece of info we don't like, but clearly it's an attack with targets, investments, and so on. And so on this basis, we're now able to take it further in a very unanimous way with allies. Yeah.
And if there's a positive sign, we don't have that many, but the East Stratcom Task Force, I know from just doing a report on it, is seeing a huge surge in people who are voluntarily going there. You can't force people to go look on the website and see the debunking, but people are headed there. So, I mean, there are some good signs that individuals are taking responsibility, just like we had to wear a mask with COVID. Melissa or Rafael, would you like to follow up before we take questions?
Agree with everything you said, and especially about the great work of Stratcom once again. But I was thinking, you know, we spoke about restrictive measures against actors of foreign information manipulations, Russian actors, for instance. We spoke about education, but we need also to speak about the enablers of foreign information manipulation, which are the platforms. And we have now an agora in the upcoming election. And I'm a bit doubting on the level of seriousness of Mr. Elon Musk, for instance, ahead of such important debates and elections. So what we need to do in upcoming months is to put pressure on those platforms. I mean, I'm not asking, of course, in my dreams I could, but to just shut down X and TikTok. No, that's a joke, don't quote me. But we need to be taken seriously by these actors, because otherwise all the debunking we can do will not stop this from spreading, and they need to feel that they are responsible. And EU has done a great work on being at the avant-garde of regulation and legislation, but now we need actions.
And Melissa, going back to the voluntary part, the EU tried to have it as voluntary mechanisms as well, and that didn't work. So now, and I'm sure we'll hear more from Vice President Jourová later, but now it's mandatory. I mean, a lot of the regulations on the platforms. But you're not going to have the luxury of doing that.
We don't have the luxury of doing that, and we're going at it eyes wide open, but we do believe it will serve as a standard, hopefully a global gold standard, and it can help put the pressure. We hope that the EU's potential to sanction, not just shine the light, is going to have a ripple effect, that it will be more difficult for platforms just to adjust their designs and their measures for one geographical area of the world, but that it will also have a positive influence on the rest of the world. And we hope that, by us, consistently advocating, pointing to a globally agreed code of conduct, which is really fundamentally aimed at the platforms. It's aimed at their responsibility. It's asking them to live up to their own standards, to human rights law, to international humanitarian law, and it will hopefully put more pressure on them as we continue also to educate people. It is crazy that we have to invest so much, that there's this whole ecosystem all over the world, that our governments are having to build whole departments. The UN is trying to scramble to get funding support for our ability to detect and to communicate in more rapidly and more strategically to get out ahead of this disinformation. It's crazy that we have to do all of that when actually the real simple solution would be safety by design and do not profit from disinformation. But short of that, we're going to have to continue to put on the pressure and to be out there communicating facts and to educate our publics to how to spot mis and disinformation and not to be swayed by it.
I'd like to take a couple of questions from the audience now. Please tell me who you are. I've got 3 hands here. Tell me who you are and who you want to ask your question to. So the gentleman in the back, and then I will take Juana, and then there was on this side. Okay, and then this lady over here. Oh,
Hello, Andrei Tsarner, Romanian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So, unlike Rafael Glucksmann, I'm a diplomat, so nobody instructed me to be diplomatic, so I won't be. You started by mentioning Romain Gary. So I'm tempted to use his Éducation européenne, his European education, who was written at the lowest point of European history as a story in the middle of World War II, in the middle of the Holocaust. We may not believe that we'll live at similar times, but many of the same elements are in evidence. And 2 of them in particular, this destruction of the information space and the prevalence of propaganda on one hand, and I'm using propaganda on purpose, not just FIMI, but that specific element of it that is both foreign and domestic. And the other one is the fact that political actors are tempted to do deals. It's almost like a devilish desire to literally use the circumstances to maximize political interest. And again, fully aware that how undiplomatic this is, whether you talk about ratification of the NATO enlargement to Sweden or any other topic that you may choose, you will see that repeatedly.
Diplomatic and make you get to your question.
Yes, and the question is, in an electoral year like this, aside the practical things that we all do either nationally or at the UN, EU, NATO level, do we have the political set of responses, and I'm asking the politicians on the panel, to address that dimension, the political dimension of the captive information space that goes way beyond what the platforms are doing and the technological side of it? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Could you hand your microphone to Juana in front of you? Thank you. Who will not make a speech, okay. I know.
No, I won't. I'm Juana Lungescu of the Royal United Services Institute, formerly of NATO. So I just wanted to say we don't have to totally despair because we're not starting from scratch. I think certainly we at NATO have been effective, certainly in the run-up to the Russian full-fledged invasion of Ukraine, by being very proactive in communicating our values, exactly what Minister Osmani and what Raphael Glucksmann were talking about, but also by pre-bunking, by actually inoculating our audiences with a virus of truth about what Russia was actually going to do and intended to do, including as regards the false flag operations with chemical weapons in the Donbass, which High Representative Borrell was alluding to. So I'm curious to hear, ahead of the European elections, what is the one thing that the EU and European countries should be doing to, exactly as you said, warn the voters about the sort of protests they may see on the Green Deal or migration? What, in practical terms, is the European Parliament and what should nations be doing? What are you doing? I think in North Macedonia, it's amazing that you've changed the curriculum. That's the sort of thing that is practical. Is there anything else that you recommend? And Melissa, you were talking about peacekeepers. How are you protecting your peacekeepers? Is there one measure you are proactively taking? And the same thing for Marie Doa. Is there one thing that NATO can do more of in terms of proactive communications and pre-bunking in this phase of the Ukrainian war and the need for continued support for Ukraine? Thanks.
I'm just going to point out that in all my years of being a journalist with her on the stage, she never would have let someone get away with that many questions. But I know that panelists all have an answer to that one because I asked them to come up with that answer as our final round. So I know everyone's been thinking about what's the most important thing. And we'll take one final question and then we'll wrap them. Yes, right here. And if any of my journalists want to ask a question, let me know.
Thank you. Claire Melford from the Global Disinformation Index. Mr. Glucksmann said that the platforms are the intermediaries between us as citizens and our information environment. And we also heard that two of the potential solutions from Melissa Fleming are safety by design and don't profit off harm. So if we know the point of intervention, the platforms, and if we have two of the potential interventions that would help, how do we get there?
Okay, so that's a lot of stuff for everyone. Melissa, I'll start with you over there. You heard this last question. I mean,
yes,
you don't have to answer
question.
the
How are we protecting our?
Yeah, how you're protecting your peacekeepers. That's from Juana. What do you think the most important thing is to do?
Yeah, thanks for that. Thanks for that question. I mean, I think on the communications front, this growing attacks on peacekeepers, I mean, some of it has actually contributed to their having to exit countries like Mali because of publics turning against them. We are stepping up our capabilities to detect and to get out ahead of disinformation campaigns and to, retrain our communicators to better get into the digital spaces and not only communicate to the publics through traditional means that are still important and effective, like radio, but the infection and the poison is coming through the digital space, and we're just stepping up our games. Obviously, there are security elements too that are being put in place that weren't there before, and it requires, actually, it's getting more expensive. And unfortunately, the sound cut off at the end of what Claire said. I didn't get her question.
Did you have something specifically for Melissa, Claire? You did. You mentioned. Yes. Sorry, I didn't write it down.
I appreciated how you quoted what I said. The simplicity of what the solution is: safety by design and stop making money off of harm. But what was the question?
That is, she wanted to know what you meant by that. How you get there.
How you get there. Yeah. No, I think it is important that because there is a lot of focus on the disinformation actors themselves, and I think it is we believe it is important to understand where the mis or disinformation or hate speech is coming from. I mean, some of it is from state actors in areas like climate It's coming from vested interests, fossil fuel companies, and in many cases it's coming from individuals. I believe, Claire, you used the term merchants of outrage, people who are profiting off of outrage, disinformation, and hate online. But again, if the platforms weren't enabling this, if they weren't incentivizing outrage, disinformation, content that makes people's heart race, then we wouldn't be here. So I think we need to all focus more on the role and the responsibility of the platforms and put on more pressure.
Raphael, you're nodding. You want to answer the questions directed to you?
Well, I think the response to all the questions are the same. So it's easy. You just need political courage. I mean, make them pay. They get money out of destabilization of our public debate. Make them pay. And be tougher. And it's not only on this, it's the same response to you. I mean, you have 200 billions of Russian money in our, close to here. It's immobilized, or how do we say, frozen? No, frozen? Yeah. No, it's not frozen because it's public. So it's immobilized, or I don't know, that's weird French English, but okay. Seize it. Work to seize it. Commission is working on that. Member states reject it. You have investment in, now you have European plan for boosting our production to help Ukrainians, yes? So why you have Paris and Berlin negotiating to cancel the word priorization from the document written by the Commission and adopted by the Parliament? Why? So that you can keep your comfort and continue selling the weapons that we need to produce for Ukraine to the Emirates or South Africa or even the US. Why? Because of lack of political leadership. At the end, you will add all the measures you want, write all the laws you want, as long as you don't have political leadership, then it will not work. And I thank the Commission because from start and day one of this war, it has shown more focus and more courage than big member states. So this is also a question that should be told, because now we are asking why, what should we tell to the voters? But I think the voters should also tell things to leaders. And they, come on, you told us Europe is at war and that war has come back to Europe. So why on earth don't you show political leadership on such issue that is so vital for us? So make them pay and seize Russian money.
Okay, I'm going to go to the minister just to follow up on that, the question about political leadership. And what did your citizens do when you cracked down on the disinformation, the misinformation, and the platform abuse that North Macedonia became sort of a sensation in the media for these little villages where these teenagers were making, you know, at least hundreds of thousands retweeting Donald Trump tweets?
Well, yeah. North Macedonia was a source and a victim of disinformation campaign. It's true, this is in the past, that a remote city in North Macedonia became a hub for US disinformation campaign when a group of teenagers established this platform and they made viral and distributed thousands of
brilliant entrepreneurs.
Indeed, and this was a business relation. But this has been fixed, and particularly the government focused on that particular city, on the youth, on involving whole society in fighting disinformation. But I was asked about what can we do in the upcoming elections, and I cannot speak about EU elections because we are not yet there to be part of it. But North Macedonia is heading toward 2 election processes: presidential and parliamentary elections in spring. And I know that we politicians, we tend to say these elections are historical, most important ones. This time, I believe there is some truth in it. Because I have never seen political landscape in North Macedonia polarized in two campuses, into European and anti-European front, and not assessing it based on rhetorics, but on actions and deeds. And for the first time, the most fundamental test is being put to our citizens, whether the EU ticket will remain a winning ticket in the Western Balkans in elections. So I think during these times, when there are no new nuances of differences between political offers, but rather it's all about Europe or another alternative, I think we should call a spade a spade. And we should be blunt, and European Union being engaged in defending the core values of what the majority of citizens of North Macedonia support and strive for. And this is European Union. We are amazed how come a country that has 80–90% support for EU membership has reached this stage when the main debate is what the outcome of elections will be. And I believe that this paradoxical situation where you have 80% of citizens supporting EU integration and still we are talking about whether EU ticket will be a winning ticket in the next election, I believe is a consequence of disinformation campaign stemming mainly from Russia. And I believe European Union, but also other players, they should not tend to both-sidism and not saying things by name. This is about facing the consequences of a long-term disinformation campaign that is trying to derail the strategic course of a country in Western Balkans, which is at the heart of European Union and European continent. This is how important it is, and I believe this is where we need joint efforts, NATO, European Union, pro-European forces in North Macedonia to join their efforts and to keep European EU ticket winning ticket for next elections. Thank you.
Pretty stark words. So Marie Doha, we're going to wrap up with your final thoughts. As Juana asked, as I had asked, what the most important things, the most important priorities for NATO? You don't have sanctions. You don't, what can you do?
We don't have elections, but however, elections in the EU, in the US, in Ukraine, in Russia, and half of the world population, this does matter to us. We also have anniversaries. There is the second anniversary of the war next month, and then there's also our own anniversary, 75th anniversary of NATO, which will actually also take place while we are preparing for the Washington summit, which will take place in the middle of American elections. So for all those reasons, elections do matter. And how do we prepare for this? I think our goal is to, on all the topics that matter to us, make sure that we are driving the conversation, that we're not letting others drive it for us. And how do we make this happen? By being prepared. And indeed, as Oana said, it's anticipating what the information space will look like next month. What will people be reading, and what do we want people to read instead? And so one of the answers, the main answers for me, is preparedness. And of course, we can't cover all the topics in the world, but we can be prepared. And right now with my team, very concretely, we have a task force. We anticipate their narratives. We know what we want to say about this. We try to be creative, not to be too institutional, not only institutional, but to have catchphrases. It's both of that. And then we need coordination, and we need to move from admiring the problem, and we admire it very much because we have all the tools right now, all the technology to actually trace disinformation and to see who's driving the conversation, when and how. But now the question is, how do we organize our responses. And this is happening increasingly with allies inside of capitals, and it's happening thanks to them, because they're getting all geared up. They're also ready to be helping us with people devoted to that, with the skills and with the ability to interact with all the other agencies, whether it's MOD, MFAs, internal minister, it really depends, or a special agency locally, whoever is best prepared and also working on disinformation.
Thank you very much, and that's going to wrap up our time because we're going to have one more high-level speaker here. Thank you so much to my panel, thank you to the audience, and thank you for allowing me to play a role in trying to combat disinformation. Thank you so much.
So we would all like to thank our esteemed parliamentarians very much for their contribution, and Terry Schulz for the moderation. I would now like to welcome Vice President of the European Commission, Věra Jourová, on the stage to share some concluding remarks from the perspective of the European Commission to tackling threat to democracy. Commissioner.
Thank you very much. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for letting me close today's event. I was informed that I am the only thing which stands between you and a cocktail, so I will try to be brief and to say all the substantial things. You have no clue how tempted I was to get into the panel discussion, which was vibrant and which was very concrete, but my task is to calm down here and give the speech about how to protect European democracy, and maybe to serve as an example for the democratic world how to protect democracy somewhere else. Very often I receive questions whether democracy can survive digital revolution, or the titles or headlines like democracy in crisis and democracy in retreat. And I have to say I had to mobilize all the knowledge and optimism to say, no, it's not true. European democracy is very vibrant, is strong, but of course, it's not automatic that it can stay like that. We have to work hard to keep it vibrant and alive. And when I look at European democracy, I always see more of it, or better picture, when I leave the EU. When I was in Ukraine, in Lviv and Kiev, I have to say I was impressed. I spoke to the students at the universities, and they were telling me, well, we want to live in the world which you have, where we can rely on independent judges and on free media, and where our civil society can flourish, and where there is no or very little security threat. And I was amazed, I admired their determination, but also I had to remember my young times. I was living until my 25 in the communist Czechoslovakia, so I know how it tastes when censorship is like a wet blanket over the information space and the society as such. So in democracy we cannot say that our work is done. We have to continue working on strengthening democracy, and on that, in this moment I really would like to pay tribute to you and say thank you to you in this room and many others scattered around Europe, because you are the ones that work daily to strengthen democratic resilience, raise awareness about the threats, or improve our information space. And you have achieved a lot. And thanks to your work, the conversation about information manipulation and disinformation has escaped the rooms of expert debates and becomes a conversation among the heads of states or a wider public. I think as Europe we have never been so aware about the risks, the tools and the methods as we are today. And as Mr. Glicksman said that the leaders need courage, not only to freeze and use the Russian money, I think also to do more against disinformation and manipulation, because I tasted it on my own skin when we started to speak about the fight against disinformation as a security threat. Immediately I received the label of the European censor. In Czech language, it's even worse. It sounds like European politruk. Does somebody here understand? It's a horrible word. And so to explain also to the leaders what it means to fight against disinformation, to define disinformation, which really can pose a threat to security and elections. This is our common task, because then, I believe, being well-informed, enlightened, the leaders will have more courage. And so this is the continuing task. I want to speak about a few things connected with also what we have been doing. To work on healthy information space. Again, it sounds like introducing some kind of censorship or correcting somebody's opinions. Some time ago, the Washington Post had a slogan that democracy dies in darkness, or as I would put it, in silence. Today, democracy might die in the cacophony of noise. The tech revolution, social media, and now AI, all contributed to a massive shift in the information space. We need to work to strengthen information integrity, which means supporting media freedom and fighting disinformation are two sides of the same coin. You know our legislation, like the Media Freedom Act, very well. But we also need to talk about AI and the future of the media and journalism. I mentioned the work on European information space. Yes, we are facing new era, new challenges, new situations, reconfiguration of powers and those who have power in the information space. But I would also recall old good traditions of Europe. I would come back to Voltaire, who said, I don't agree with you, but I will protect your right to say what you have just said. So I just wanted to make this conceptual comment that whatever we do in fighting against disinformation and supporting media, we strive for getting the facts right. This is about the evidence-based truth. It's not about somebody's ideological truth. And very often when I sit in the European Parliament and hear the far right and far left, I want to shout how horribly I disagree. But my job as the Commissioner for Values, including freedom of speech, is to protect their right to say the things. So I hope also this concept will be maintained after the elections, because the temptation to start correcting somebody's opinions and language might be too strong. So you who will, it's not my case, I will stop this year, but you who will be influencing the information space in the EU, please be mindful of the need to keep this under control. Freedom of speech has to remain the main principle. Speaking about the media, they are also facing new situations, new powers influencing their work. You know well that, and I think the debate was very much occupied by the power of the big tech. The big tech and digital revolution influenced not only how the media work, but especially how they are paid, because a lot of money disappeared from the media market. We tried to improve the situation of the media because we desperately need professional and strong media scene and landscape in the EU. In the Digital Services Act, we said to the platforms, you have to pay attention to the content. and you have to remove illegal content, and you have to do more of fact-checking in 24 European states' languages, fact-checking of disinformation. And we didn't enable or open any kind of exception for the content produced by professional media. So in the Media Freedom Act, I wanted to create a balance. So now the Media Freedom Act says to the platforms, before you remove some content produced, developed by the media, professional, recognized media, come back to them and give them a chance to defend the content before you remove anything. I didn't want anyone to have the upper hand in the information space. It must not be Mr. Musk. It should not be the director of Axel Springer. So sorry, I am maybe concrete. I just want to be illustrative. I think that we need to create the ecosystem where the evidence-based truth will have sufficient space. The same new situation is when it comes to AI, artificial intelligence. Well, I think that you are following what's happening in the United States, the dispute between the New York Times and OpenAI, the stealing of the content produced by the journalists of New York Times. We will have to wait for the court decision on that. But in Europe, we came with some kind of answer already now. There is a very strong article on protection of copyright in the AI Act, which means that the media could have a strong protection against the, I will call it stealing, but against the usage of the content protected by copyright against the AI systems. It has to get into practice, and I think that the media cannot win the fight against big tech and AI systems. But they can, also on the basis of our legislation, have stronger position in order to create some kind of productive synergy between them, between big tech and between AI, generative AI especially systems. Does it sound naive? I don't think. I think that this is inevitable. And till the end of my days in the Commission, I will be traveling across the EU and explain the concept of productive synergy so that the media are also equipped with the knowledge of what our new legislation delivers and what kind of new protection can be used. Ladies and gentlemen, I just get out of my papers. Yeah, it's always dangerous situation, and your cocktail is getting fairer. But I will come back to what I wanted to tell you today. Disinformation/security. Well, we saw it already after the invasion of Russia to Crimea, that this is the new big threat for the EU. And again, I know how Soviet Union propaganda was efficient. I was one of the millions of brainwashed ones. And suddenly we saw massive disinformation campaign picturing Ukrainians as the nation which does not deserve to have own territory, which doesn't deserve to have own language, which doesn't deserve to exist. And it did not take effect fully. They invested, how Mr. Glicksman said, 200 billion, what, dollars, euros? No, it was about a frozen asset. But they are investing big money into the propaganda in the EU. And I think that without naming it clearly, and I think Josep Borrell named again today Russia and China, without naming the authors of the propagandist campaigns, we cannot fight sufficiently against them and against its impact. The impact is asymmetric. In some countries bigger than in some others. It also correlates with the attention the states pay to the media literacy and education. So this is a long-lasting fight which we have ahead of us. Last thing, as you know, we adopted last-minute legislation, Defense of Democracy package, and it is connected with the money which our adversaries are or might be investing into influencing European democracy and European political life in the EU. And this Defense of Democracy package includes a legislation on transparency of foreign funding, and I think that this is the step in the right direction, and I hope the legislation will become a reality as soon as possible. Here again, I am watching the members of the Parliament. I think that I am beyond time. Maybe last comment on the new situation around the AI. I already mentioned AI and the necessary synergy with the media. In the AI Act, we require as much as transparency as possible, which means that the platforms and tech businesses should work on standards on labeling AI-generated content. There is a growing consensus that AI software must communicate with each other. So if one generates a photo that is posted, for instance, on social media, the social media platforms knows immediately this is AI generated. I also want the platforms to clearly label paid political ads. This communication between different systems and different platforms, we discussed it quite thoroughly when I was in Davos last week. I spoke about it with Meta, with Google, with Microsoft. I will speak about also I spoke about it with the CEO of YouTube, and I think that we will need to see more cooperation between them so that they can identify the AI production and can label it or watermark it so that the people are sure what they see and what they read. And again, in this context on AI production, my mantra will always have to be whatever we do, whatever sophisticated regulations we are introducing, we have to make sure that there are two big things being maintained for the human beings, and it is the freedom of speech and already mentioned copyright. Because if we give up on these two big rights of human beings and give it to the AI, I think that we will appear on a slippery slope. So this is also what we tried to project into the AI Act. We worked on the foreign information manipulation and AI with Joseph and Thierry. I think that we were facing a lot of new situations, very fast development, and the regulators will always be slower than the technologists and the businesses. But we tried to catch up and to introduce the European rules, first of its kind, which might serve also as a global standard. And so, once again, my testimony today tries to convince you that we have done a lot, but at the same time, I have to add that there is still a lot to be done, and especially to keep the intensity of work. And again, at the end of my speech, I would like to thank you for your work, because I think that this is the job for many, many different bodies and people, leaders, opinion makers, and so on. This is our common task, and I am sure that we will manage. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vice President, for your concluding remarks. So we are coming to an end of this event. I would like to thank you all for making time tonight to listen to all our interesting esteemed panelists and speakers. And I would also like to thank the whole team at ES Stratcom, this fantastic FIMI team with Lutz Gullner, Jakob Tam, and all the team for this event. I would now invite you to the reception we are hosting here downstairs for a drink or two. Thank you very much.